Hello, everyone, and welcome to NSTA Web Seminars, where you find live interactive learning at your desktop. Today, we're programming a new science update titled Protecting the Elusive and Endangered Hawaiian False Killer Whale. My name is Flavio Mendez. I'll be moderating this program. With me tonight is Don Boonstra, assisting as technical coordinator. Before we begin, we'd like to go over the NSTA virtual program norms. The National Science Teaching Association strongly supports diversity, equity, and inclusion in the classroom and in all of our programs. We're committed to providing a welcoming, safe, productive, harassment-free environment for all participants of our events and programs, regardless of their gender, gender identity, sexual orientation, ability, ethnicity, race, color, age, marital status, veteran status, socioeconomic status, or religion. We ask that all attendees be mindful of their surroundings and of their fellow participants. All participants are expected to exercise consideration and respect in their speech and actions and to refrain from demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior and speech. NSTA does not allow promotion of other products in our chats during web seminars. We ask that attendees keep the conversation on topic, use positive language, and remain courteous of others throughout the event, and allow everyone time to participate in the chat. It is time now to introduce our presenters. It is my honor to introduce Celeste Handley and Krista Graham from NOAA. So let's start with Celeste. Celeste Handley is an education and outreach specialist with the NOAA Fisheries Pacific Islands Regional Office. She's worked with NOAA Fisheries since 2019 and enjoys connecting students and the community with the natural resources in the region. Prior to joining NOAA, Handley worked with the U.S. Army's Natural Resources Program on Oahu and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Her background in education and international studies from Penn State University and experience working in the field to protect endangered species has given her a passion for lifelong learning and being outdoors. About Krista. Krista Graham is an endangered species biologist with the NOAA Fisheries Pacific Islands Regional Office in Honolulu, Hawaii. With over 15 years with NOAA, Krista has worked to contribute to the overall mission of sustainably managing living marine resources. Specifically, Krista researches the status of marine species to determine if they should be listed and protected under the U.S. Endangered Species Act, and she develops recovery plans for how to conserve and protect these threatened and endangered species. Krista received her master's degree in marine affairs and policy in 2003 from the University of Miami's Rosenstiel School of Marine and Atmospheric Research. Presenting first tonight is Krista. Welcome, Krista.
Hi, thank you so much, Flavio. I am going to go ahead and share my screen now. Let me just go ahead and do that. Okay, can you see what I'm presenting?
Yes, wonderful. Thank you so much.
Okay. So again, thank you, Flavio, for that introduction. Celeste and I are really excited to be joining you virtually today to talk about false killer whales and why they are such a unique species. So thank you all for joining us. So in this science update, I will talk about cetaceans in general, and then I'm going to move on to false killer whales. Then I will introduce you to the main Hawaiian Islands insular false killer whale, which is an island-associated population that is genetically, behaviorally, ecologically, and culturally unique. And I'll explain why they are endangered under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Now, this presentation will also introduce activities and resources to support classroom explorations, including how to be a community scientist and identify the species, how to report sightings and upload dorsal fin photos, and how to collect data like a real marine biologist. You might be wondering why we have a film strip on this slide. Well, one reason we are excited to be here today is to share about a species that is relatively unknown around the world, yet is quite unique. Today, we hope you'll join us in recognizing the false killer whale for the star that it is. But first, let me briefly introduce you to NOAA Fisheries. NOAA Fisheries is responsible for the stewardship of the nation's ocean resources and their habitat. We are an office of the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, or NOAA, within the Department of Commerce. We have a headquarters based out of Washington, D.C., and we have 5 regional offices, of which Celeste and I are based in the Pacific Islands Regional Office in Honolulu, Hawaii. And we also have 6 science centers that support our regional offices. We also have more than 20 laboratories around the United States and in our US territories and other partners that we work with across the nation. Okay, so before I jump into talking specifically about the elusive and endangered main Hawaiian Islands insular false killer whale, let's briefly take a more overarching look at cetaceans. There are over 130 species of marine mammals, and collectively, whales, dolphins, and porpoises are known as cetaceans. Now, there are 2 types of cetaceans. We've got baleen and toothed. Now, baleen whales, or mysticetes, have stiff plates of baleen made of keratin, which is the same thing that your fingernails and your toenails are made of. And they grow down from the gums of the upper jaw. Now, these baleen plates, along with the whale's enormous throat grooves, they can expand like a balloon, and they filter vast quantities of water and trap plankton and other small creatures such as krill and copepods inside of their mouth. Now, baleen whales also have a double or a paired blowhole on top of their head for breathing. Now, in comparison, toothed whales, or odontocetes, they have teeth, and they feed on fish, squid, and other marine mammals such as seals and sea lions. They only have a single blowhole at the top of their head for breathing, though. Now, let's briefly examine the differences among whales, dolphins, and porpoises. So the term whale is often used to distinguish species based on their size, with whales typically being much larger than dolphins and porpoises. And this is especially true for baleen whales, which are some of the largest animals on the planet, like the blue whale and the fin whale, and the larger toothed whale, such as the sperm whale. Now, beyond size, there are a number of other characteristics that separate whales from dolphins and porpoises, namely their face, their fins, and their body shapes. Whales have a tiny or even no dorsal fin compared to the well-defined dorsal fin of dolphins and porpoises. Now, apart from beluga whales, whales also have fused neck vertebrae, and this is an adaptation that helps them to support the enormous weight of their heads. Now, many dolphin species have flexible necks. As for dolphins, they have longer noses, which are called a rostrum or a beak in marine mammals. They have bigger mouths, and they have a more curved dorsal fin and longer and leaner bodies than porpoises. Okay, now let's get Celeste here and see if our audience can determine which of these 7 species are dolphins.
Thanks so much, Krista. Yeah, so for those of you who just got really relaxed, we need you to come back and engage because we need to find the dolphins in this image. So I just pasted a link in the chat that goes to pollev.com/NOAA101. You can open that window up or another tab, and we're going to hop over there for a minute, cast your vote, and then we'll hop back in this meeting.
Yeah, so tell us what you think are dolphins in these examples here.
And I can see we're getting a lot of votes cast already. Excellent. I see a lot of confidence out there. We must have some cetacean fans in the audience. Lots of votes for that pantropical spotted dolphin at the bottom there and the spinner dolphin. We'll give folks a few more minutes to vote. All right, Krista, how do we do?
Yeah, so let's see. There's actually only 4 dolphins that are presented in this graphic. And two of them actually have the name whale in them. That's the long fin pilot whale and the killer whale. The killer whale is actually the largest of the dolphin species. So we have 4 dolphins here. We have 2 porpoises, the harbor porpoise and the Dall's porpoise. And then we've got the sei whale, which is a baleen whale. So well done, everyone. Okay, now that I've given you a broad overview of cetaceans, let's begin our journey into learning more about false killer whales now. So even though it's called a false killer whale, this species is actually a dolphin. And the false killer whale was first described in 1846 by a British paleontologist and biologist named Richard Owen. And this was based on a skull that was discovered in England back in 1843. And at that time, it was given the scientific name Pseudorca, which means false orca, because its skull, especially the teeth, resemble that of a true orca or a killer whale. Now, however, both species actually are dolphins, but that is the only resemblance between the killer whale and the false killer whale. Now, false killer whales can grow up to 20 feet and weigh up to 3,000 pounds. They have a black or dark gray body, although they have lighter areas that may occur on the underside between the pectoral fins or on either side of their head. They also have a prominent curved dorsal fin that is located about the midpoint of the back, and the tip can be rounded or pointed. Now, the melon or the head lacks a distinct rostrum. Remember, that's the beak or the nose. The melon tapers gradually from the area of the blowhole to a rounded tip. And in males, this melon actually extends a little bit farther than in females. Now, what's interesting about false killer whales is that their pectoral fins have a unique shape among cetaceans, where they have this distinct central hump that creates an S-shaped pectoral fin. As for distribution, the false killer whale is a single global species with no subspecies, and they are found in tropical and warm temperate oceanic waters, typically in deep offshore waters as well. They are known to be rare or have low density throughout their range. Now, false killer whales are long-lived. The males live to be in their 50s, and the females live well into their 60s. They are slow to mature. So females mature around age 10, and males don't mature until about 18 years of age. They also only give birth to a single calf. This is like one calf every 6 to 7 years, that's a long time between having a calf compared to many other dolphin species. Typically, it's around 2 to 3 years. And what's interesting about false killer whales is that females have a long post-reproductive period, meaning that they go through menopause around the ages of 45 to 55. And this is actually quite rare in cetaceans, but it has been documented in other highly social animals, such as killer whales, beluga whales, short-fin pilot whales, and sperm whales. Now, females are pregnant anywhere from 11 to 16 months, and they nurse their calf for 1.5 to 2 years. Calves are about 5 to 6 feet at birth, weighing about 175 pounds. Now, false killer whales are highly social marine mammals that form strong long-term bonds. And this is very similar to killer whales, beluga whales, sperm whales, and some other dolphin species. False killer whales are typically observed in groups of about 10 to 20 individuals. However, they can be observed in these widespread aggregations that are, 5 to 10 miles wide and in small groups, but that those small groups total hundreds of individuals. Captive interbreeding has actually also occurred between false killer whales and short-fin pilot whales, as well as with bottlenose dolphin. And the offspring is viable, meaning it can go on and reproduce. And an example can be seen here on the bottom right of the screen. This is a wholphin, and this is a female named Kei Kaimalu from Sea Life Park here in Hawaii. And her mom is a bottlenose dolphin, and her dad is a false killer whale. And Kei Kaimalu has gone on to have her own calf named Kavili Kai. And Kavili Kai is 3/4 bottlenose dolphin and 1/4 false killer whale. Now, false killer whales are top predators, meaning that they are at the top of the food chain. They eat mainly fish and squid, although there are populations elsewhere in the world that have been seen attacking other marine mammals, such as bottlenose dolphins, sperm whales, and even humpback whales. And there's some populations that have been observed attacking sharks, such as the oceanic white-tip shark. This species feeds both day and night, and they consume between 3 and 4.2% of their body weight daily. And the average human male eats about 0.5% of his body weight each day. Now, a little about their culture is that this species is frequently seen sharing prey and handling their prey for prolonged periods. And a wonderful story that I've heard is from the photographer who took this picture, Darren Verbeck. He was out free diving and came across a pod of a cluster of false killer whales, and these false killer whales had a fish in their mouth. It was, I believe it was a mahi-mahi, and they came up to Darren and they let go of the fish, and he just grabbed the fish, and then he turned and he handed it to the false killer whale that was next to him. It was kind of like playing a game of hot potato. And so the fish makes its way around the group, and eventually, they're each taking a little nibble, and then eventually ends its way back to the original individual that caught the fish. Now, Celeste, I think you have queued up a surprise for us, correct?
Yes, we are so excited to have something really special to share from the field from our partners at Cascadia Research Collective. These folks spend so much time on the water and just happen to be in this amazing spot documenting these animals. I believe it was off of Lanai. So Krista, if you can advance to the next slide, we'll take a look at this predation event.
Yes. Just advance to the next slide. Okay, so that was such a cool video of an actual predation event. So now I've given you an overview of false killer whales as a global species, but now I want to focus on false killer whales in Hawaii. There are 3 populations of false killer whales in Hawaii. We've got the northwestern Hawaiian Islands population, the pelagic population, and the main Hawaiian Islands insular false killer whale population. Now, although I've mentioned that false killer whales currently exist as one global species, for management purposes, Hawaii has 3 populations or stocks of false killer whales. First is the main Hawaiian Islands insular population. Now, they're referred to as an insular population, which means of or relating to an island. Now, we and our partners have satellite tracked this population, and they remain from near shore out to no more than about 44 miles, so like 72 kilometers from the main Hawaiian Islands. In contrast, the northwestern Hawaiian Islands population prefers the more nearshore waters surrounding the northwestern Hawaiian Islands. And this is likely because of the underwater topography in the area and thus the prey in the area. They have a range that overlaps a bit with the main Hawaiian Islands insular population, and that's within the gray area around the gray arrow around the islands of Kauai and Niihau. Now, finally, we've got the pelagic population, which actually encompasses the entire Hawaiian archipelago and well beyond the green dotted line. But for management purposes, that green dotted line denotes the United States exclusive economic zone around Hawaii. And while some pelagic individuals have been satellite tracked in nearshore waters, the pelagic population predominantly prefers the deep open ocean and the prey that is available out there. So even though all three populations are technically the same species, each of the populations in Hawaii are genetically, behaviorally, ecologically, and culturally distinct from one another. And this means that even though their ranges overlap somewhat, behaviorally, the three populations in Hawaii don't socially interact. Genetically, they don't breed with one another. And ecologically, there are notable differences in what they like to eat and where they like to spend their time foraging, resting, socializing, etc. As for cultural differences, that includes prey sharing that has been noticed among the insular population and grandmothering of younger calves. Now, as I've mentioned, false killer whales are one of the most studied marine mammals in the world. And scientists in Hawaii have collected information on the species over the past few decades through various means. And I'd like to show you a few of the ways in which we collect information on this species. Visual observations can be made from large and small vessels, including fishing and research vessels. And this is done to photo identify individuals. And that's because a dolphin's fin is like a human fingerprint. It has different notches and nicks. So scientists who study dolphins are able to identify individual dolphins by their fin. Visual observations are also used to count groups, to determine the group's size and their behavior, or to look for scars that might indicate such things as hooking or entanglement from a fishing interaction, or a shark bite, or perhaps propeller wounds from a boat. Now, aerial surveys, including from planes as well as drones, we are using those to take photographs of the animal's body condition. And this is so that we can see whether or not an individual is thin and emaciated, or if perhaps a female is pregnant. And more recently, we are using drones to collect breath samples for health analyses. So the drone under a research permit can get low enough and sample when a false killer whale exhales. They sample the breath and the droplets that are expelled, and we can analyze that. Now, data has been collected from applying different types of electronic scientific tags as well. And these non-invasive tags are typically suction cupped onto the back of the animal. And this can tell us information such as where and how the animal travels, how long it stays in an area, how deep they are diving and how long those dives last, and what time of day they are diving. We also take a biopsy, which is a small, typically painless plug of tissue and blubber. And this information can tell us such things as their gender, as well as their reproductive status of whether or not they are pregnant, and it looks like they're about to have a calf based on certain levels of hormones. And it can also tell us whether or not they just had a baby. And in analyzing the blubber and the tissue, it can also tell us more about the level of environmental pollutants in the individual. And this can then indicate if an individual might be sick from disease or from contaminants. Now, stranding events and associated necropsies, which is an animal autopsy, these also provide invaluable information. Now, a stranding is the beaching of a live or a dead marine mammal. And there have been 6 strandings of false killer whales from the insular population in the last 20 years. Now, the stranded deceased animal on the left, this occurred back in 2013 off the island of Hawaii. And this was an adult male that was noted as thin. And it actually had these 5 fishing hooks that were found in its stomach. But surprisingly, these fishing hooks were not the cause of death. And a number of pathologists reviewed the information about the species, and the cause of death is unknown, but this individual did have a heart abnormality that may have contributed to its death. Now, all of these sources of info help us learn valuable information, such as how they socially interact with one another. Now, for example, this is a social network diagram coupled from photo ID, as indicated from circles, and satellite tag data as indicated by the triangles, compiled over about 20 years. Now, this data indicates that false killer whale populations in Hawaii are socially unconnected with each other. Now, what that means is that pelagic animals are only hanging out with other pelagic animals, and insular false killer whales are only hanging out with one another, and same with the population up in the Northwesterns. So this social connectedness behavior is really quite rare. And that's because most marine mammals typically don't form these strong long-term bonds. But besides false killer whales, it's only seen in a few other species of marine mammals like killer whales. Okay, Celeste, can you cue up the poll to see if our audience can guess what false killer whales eat?
Yes, at this time, everyone, it's time to hop over to pollev.com/NOAA101. I threw that in the chat for you again. So what do you all think false killer whales eat? Any guesses out there?
I mean, all of those options are really good. We've got a lot of votes for mahi-mahi and tuna, lots of squid. Got some for ono or wahoo, some for salmon and lobster. All right. Well, interestingly enough, false killer whales eat only 4 of these species. They do not actually eat lobster and they do not eat salmon, but good job, everyone. So we've actually learned that false killer whales in Hawaii like to eat at least 24 different prey items that we've been able to identify, either from observing them eating these individual fish species or from examining their stomach contents. And so you can see they like to eat a lot of the same species that we eat, which is tuna, mahi-mahi, swordfish, mongchong, wahoo, etc. Okay, now let's take a look at the star of this presentation, the main Hawaiian Islands insular false killer whale, which is the only population of false killer whales listed as endangered under the U.S. Endangered Species Act. Now, endangered means a species is endangered of extinction throughout all or a significant portion of its range. So not only do we know that insular false killer whales don't socialize with pelagic or the population up in the northwestern Hawaiian Islands, but 20 years of photo ID data show that there is a social structure within the insular population. So this is the entire insular population, and now look at this. This actually shows us that there are a total of 5 distinct social groups or clusters just within the main Hawaiian Islands insular population. And through photo ID and satellite tags, we also know that insular false killer whales, how they use their habitat. And each of the 5 social clusters has different habitat areas that they prefer. Now, collectively, they also spend slightly more time on the eastern or the windward sides of the islands versus the western or the leeward side. And this is likely because of oceanographic currents and upwellings that enhance the food options. We've also been able to identify high use areas where they like to spend most of the time, and that's indicated on the map on the left. Any of the pixelated squares that are pink, salmon colored, and red, that's where they spend most of their time. Now, as I've mentioned, main Hawaiian Islands insular false killer whales are one of the rarest marine mammal populations. And so there's an estimated 167 individuals. And while we don't know how many individuals in the population there used to be, historically, we have estimated it to be about 655 individuals. And there's actually several lines of evidence that suggest the abundance had declined for unknown reasons until we think about the early 2000s. However, we don't really know what the population trend currently is, meaning we don't know if the population has begun to increase, if it has recently stabilized, or if it has, if it's perhaps still declining. And the reason for that is because of various changes in how we survey for the species over the years. So that's something we're really trying to work on to figure out how best to define the trend of this species. Now, because of concern for the population, a nonprofit organization known as the Natural Resources Defense Council, they petitioned NOAA Fisheries to list the insular population as endangered under the ESA. So we convened a group of scientists to review the species back in 2010, and they identified 19 different threats. Now, one of the main threats to the species, in addition to their small population size, is incidental or unintentional interactions with fisheries. Now, false killer whales take bait and prey off of fishing lines, and this can cause them to get hooked in the lip or the jaw, or it can cause them to completely swallow the hook that is inside the fish. Sometimes they can even get entangled in the fishing line, and this can cause injuries to their dorsal fin, with one individual having lost their entire dorsal fin. Now, the worst outcome of an interaction from fisheries can lead to drowning. It's also a problem for fishermen because when fishermen are losing their bait or their catch, or it's destroying their gear, this is really costly in both money and time. Now, another threat to the species is contaminants in the marine environment that build up in their system. And because false killer whales live a long time and they feed high on the food web, they accumulate high levels of pollutants based on the food that they eat. And such high levels of pollutants in their body can cause health issues and disease, and it can affect their reproductive status. And we're actually noticing that insular false killer whales have much higher levels of pollutants in their body compared to the pelagic population or the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands population. And that's likely because the insular population around the main Hawaiian Islands lives more near shore to a metropolitan area. Now, some other threats to the species include noise and vessel traffic. Let's see. Sorry, my slide isn't advancing. Oh, there we go. It includes noise such as vessel traffic and sonar, marine debris ingestion, effects from climate change, which primarily affects their prey, oil spills, disease and biotoxins. Biotoxins are things from like harmful algal blooms, and then predation from species such as tiger sharks, cookie cutter sharks, sometimes even killer whales, and vessel strikes. Now, because of its small population size and the number of threats that are affecting the population, NOAA Fisheries listed the main Hawaiian Islands insular false killer whale as endangered under the Endangered Species Act back in 2012. Now, we also designated critical habitat, meaning we identified areas throughout the main Hawaiian Islands that are essential for the conservation of the population. Finally, to protect and recover the main Hawaiian Islands insular population, we worked with federal and state agencies, NGOs, fishermen, and researchers to develop a recovery plan for this population. And this plan, which was released in the beginning of November, it identifies about 100 actions and activities from research to management to monitoring to outreach and education on ways for us and partners to better understand the population, understand the threats and how they are acting on the population, and to monitor our efforts to conserve and recover this population. Okay, now we'd like to introduce resources, including how to be a community scientist and identify false killer whales, as well as how to report sightings and upload dorsal fins. And this is the part where we all get to play a role in the false killer whales story. Now, one aspect of this is learning to ID false killer whales in the first place, because that's step one. And I think we have a little exercise for us to explore that. Celeste, can you cue up the next exercise for our listeners?
All right, we're going to hop back into Poll Everywhere again, and we want to know how you would describe a false killer whale's appearance to someone else. So we're going to get out our best adjectives and descriptive language and see what we can come up with. Imagine you're the first person documenting this species. How would you describe this animal? Dark, long, and narrow. Excellent. I love it. Gray, big fish. A big, fat, dark dolphin. Okay. Guess it could depend on the body condition. Sometimes they can be thin. We see somebody is familiar with pilot whales out there, an animal with slightly less bulbous head. Oh, ugly and gray. I think it's a beautiful animal. That's one of my favorite in this group. Majestic and powerful. See, there's differing opinions out there on this. Small dorsal, no obvious white colors. Excellent observations here.
I like that. I like the Free Willy meets Flipper.
This is awesome.
Yeah, these are some great descriptions. Very good. Thank you, guys. All right, let's move on. So you guys all did a really great job describing false killer whales. So well done in paying attention. But what I haven't told you is that there are 4 tropical species of marine mammals that all resemble each other because of their similar gray-black coloration, their bulbous head without a rostrum or the nose, their curved dorsal fin, and the fact that their ranges broadly overlap. So these 4 species are melon-headed whales, short-finned pilot whales, pygmy killer whales, and of course, false killer whales. Collectively and out of ease, fishermen refer to these marine mammals as blackfish, even though they're not fish at all. And we and our partners, such as the state of Hawaii, the Pacific Whale Foundation, and Cascadia Research Collective, we pass out these blackfish ID cards so that those out on the water can learn to better identify false killer whales. But it's okay to call in or send photographs of any blackfish species because our partners study all of these animals in our region. Now, besides learning to better ID the species, another important action is adapting fishing practices to support false killer whales and other marine life. And one of the most important adaptations is switching from the traditional J hook to a barbless circle hook. You may ask, well, why is it important to use a barbless circle hook? Well, first, it's better for our protected species because if an animal is accidentally hooked, the barbless circle hook will release quicker or it will self-shed. And this helps to reduce trauma and letting the animal return to normal activities. Second, it's actually much better for the fish. It's easier to quickly release the unwanted catch without causing damage to the fish. And this means more healthy fish for others to catch in the future. Also, fishermen are encouraged to pull their gear and relocate their fishing activity if they see a marine mammal in the area, especially if they see a false killer whale, since false killer whales are known to steal bait and catch off of fishing lines, which we refer to as depredate. Now, we also encourage anyone on the water to take any photos of the animal as well as call us to let us know about the sighting. So we've created a website at falsekillerwhales.org, and people can upload their photos and their sighting information. And this is really important because the more we know about these animals and where they like to spend their time, the better we can protect them. Now, keep in mind that the insular false killer whales are a protected species, so it's important to keep a safe distance from them, about 50 yards, to prevent any disturbance. Now, beyond community science, we have a few outreach materials to build awareness about this species for youth and anyone who wants to learn more. So I'd like to call back Celeste to help us talk about the education that we've got related to this species.
Great, thanks so much, Krista. This is something I'm personally really passionate about, has been such a joy to do at NOAA and across my career, and false killer whales have been really exciting in that regard as well. So most people in Hawaii know about humpback whales and spinner dolphins, but many people are not familiar with false killer whales, as I'm sure you're starting to gather. Perhaps if you've been to Hawaii, you've even traveled here to see humpbacks or spinner dolphins. So yeah, we're trying to get this species into the limelight, and we wanted to introduce some of the activities we have developed and our partners have developed to educate about this species. So I think these dorsal fin photos are one of the most fascinating aspects of the community science work, because we really are able to learn about individual animals and their populations over time. So it's really fun to bring these sightings into the community. Not everyone can be far out on the water. And so they can appreciate these unique animals and all that NOAA and partners like Cascadia Research Collective are putting into studying and protecting them. So Cascadia keeps a catalog of these dorsal fin photos that corresponds with the individual animals. So one of the things we like to do at outreach events with this species and other cetaceans is engage kids in dorsal fin matching games so that they can appreciate the uniqueness of each individual animal and why reporting sightings and sharing photographs is really so important. And as you'll see in our next activity, we receive a lot of these reports from the public that really aid our scientists in finding these species on the water. And so we're going to engage you all again here. And if Flavio, if you could bring that poll up, we're going to do a match right now, just one example. So folks, see if you can find the match from that top dorsal fin to the bottom. And I see the responses filling in very quickly now. Folks are very quick to respond on the Zoom poll. Excellent. See if you can identify some key features on those dorsal fins. All right, well, I think we've had most folks fill in the poll here so we can reveal our responses.
So let's, from those who responded, we have 79% selected image B. We have 11% both image A and C.
Okay, let's do the big reveal. For those of you who guessed B, well done.
Yes, excellent work, everybody. Great job IDing that matching dorsal fin. So we'll just hop on into some additional activities that we have before we get into our Q&A. We also have an activity where kids can actually decorate their own unique dorsal fin. So this is something you could bring into your classroom if you had, say, elementary school students. You can color a unique dorsal fin, paste that on your back. You can even take a photo with it. And that really just represents the uniqueness of these individual animals and to help your students connect with that. And all of these resources are available within that collection page. So please do check it out and take some time to look over those and see what might be useful to you. All right, so we also wanted to introduce a new activity that we have just developed. This is hot off the press, and this is our soft launch of this new engaging activity, a monitoring experience that you can share with your students virtually. So seeing these animals is not super easy. As we mentioned, a lot of these animals, people can, be born and raised here, have never seen them on the water in their lives. They're super rare. And so this is a chance to jump into some of those amazing encounters that folks like our partners at Cascadia Research Collective and our staff at the NOAA Fisheries Pacific Island Fisheries Science Center have had in the field. And it gives your students a chance to identify different false killer whale behaviors, distinctive markings and threats to the animals, and also a call to action. So let's dive into that activity. I'm actually going to take over sharing and share this story map that we have for you folks. Okay, so when you hop over to the page here, you get this awesome footage of, hopefully folks are still seeing that screen.
Not yet.
Oh, not yet. Let's try that again. I think it stopped sharing. Just one moment.
Now we see it.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Krista. Yeah, so you're greeted with this amazing aerial footage that our research partners at Cascadia Research Collective shot of a pod of animals, or excuse me, a group of animals that they saw in the water. And you'll just dive through this exercise so students can get a little background, some of the information that we shared today about where these animals are, where the different populations live. And then they'll actually dive into collecting data in the field as if they were on a small research vessel. So they'll be looking at things like what goes into the effort to collect information about these animals on the water. What types of information do the scientists collect about these observations on the water? So let's just jump into our virtual field survey and have a look at that. You can actually click around this map. This is all based on authentic encounters that NOAA Fisheries and Cascadia Research Collective had throughout the Hawaiian Islands. So you can click around and that'll take you to individual encounters on the water. So you can kind of hop here between Hawaii Island and Maui. And then you read about these encounters. You can take a closer look at the beautiful images captured. These are like 1 in 3,000 photos. The team takes a lot of images when they do have these rare encounters and painfully goes through all of them to find these awesome shots of animals in action. And then what you'll do is actually hop into a data challenge for each encounter. And so we'll just take a look at data challenge 10 here. And give me a second to split this screen up. All right, so I have both of my windows up here so I can kind of see my encounter, but also my data sheet. So you'll take a look at the sea state. So for this one, a little bit hard to tell. There are some resources there for your students to check out sea state. You can kind of click through that. Your group size. So we'll look at our field notes. It says there were 14 animals traveling in this case. So I'm going to type in 14. Our location. I think we are, where are we here? I'm going to hide this so I can see a little bit better. Looks like we're in kind of the Maui Nui complex here. So that's the islands of Molokai, Lanai, Maui, and Kaho'olawe. And let's look at the behaviors happening here. So if I look closely at our field notes, we can see there were 14 animals. They were traveling. All right, we'll check that off. Several mahi-mahi predation events. Ono also observed, but no predation observed on the Ono. And for those of you who are not familiar, Ono is the Pacific wahoo species, one of the favorite foods, as you saw earlier. So we did have some foraging and feeding. And if you look very closely, I believe there's at least some lunging happening here. Perhaps this animal breached completely out of the water at some point. So you can start filling in your answers and see we had some ono. So I'll check off, what other animals were observed in this case. Hard to tell if this animal has distinctive markings. Sometimes you will see those on an animal for something like from an interaction or perhaps a wound healing from the past. So I'm just going to put none for this since I can't quite see anything. And then you just hit your submission and you can actually get feedback immediately on your score, a little more information in case you missed something in your observations. Looks like I got behavior wrong there. So yes, I was supposed to choose leaping in this case. So have fun exploring this. We're actually looking for your feedback and input on this activity. This is brand new, but it's a really amazing chance to see things most people have never encountered in their lives. To see these animals in action on the water is an incredible treat. And finally, the activity closes with, as I mentioned, some opportunities to reflect and dive in further to some of the threats impacting the species, such as fisheries interactions, and also just some natural things happening on the water, interactions with other species. And of course, a call to action in terms of reporting sightings, because we want our future marine scientists, or even if you're just a fan of false killer whales and enjoy being on the water, we want to hear from you. We want to get reports from those animals so we can continue to recover the main Hawaiian Islands insular false killer whale population. With that, I think I'll turn it back to Krista, but please don't hesitate to reach out, folks, with information, questions you have as far as this activity or any of the things that we shared in the collection. We do want to hear from you and see what would benefit you best in your classroom. So our emails will be shared shortly.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, Celeste. It's such an incredible activity. I've actually gone through all of the encounters, and there's a number of videos, and it's just exceptional photos and videos to share with students. So moving on, again, we welcome any questions or feedback on the story map that Celeste just shared. As she mentioned, this was a soft launch today, so you're able to access it, but the plan is to continue to add data and just make sure that it can be the best resource for educators as possible. So I guess now we're to the point where we're going to roll the credits and acknowledge a few of our partners, and that is NOAA Fisheries, Pacific Islands Fisheries Science Center, Cascadia Research Collective, the State of Hawaii Division of Aquatic Resources, and the Hawaii Institute of Marine Biology, as well as the Pacific Whale Foundation. We'd especially like to thank the Cascadia Research Collective for providing the numerous photos and videos that were used in both this presentation as well as in the story map that Celeste shared. We also would like to thank the artists and the cartoonists who granted us permission to use their drawings and images. And finally, we just want to thank all of you for joining us for today's science update. We hope that the Hawaiian false killer whale has a few new fans and that you'll join us in helping them rise to stardom. So mahalo. All right, back to you, Flavio.
Thank you very much, Krista. If there are questions for our participants, please type in the chat. I think someone may have maybe on their keyboard and is running fast there. Perhaps that was an accident. Thanks for stopping that. But if there are questions for our presenters, we'd love to, no problem. We'd love to take your questions. We have a few minutes for questions. I was really impressed with the presentation, Krista and Celeste. Thank you so much for sharing. And it's so wonderful that this evening was the debut of the activity. We're excited about that and share that with our participants. I was really curious about those pods. I think you called them, Celeste, in the chat. Those groups, those of the and I think Bruce said something like like a subset of the subset of the groups that have socially are integrated within the insular. So I guess the idea of pods, as I was reading on the internet. They're like families. Are they related to each other? And would they be violent to other maybe pods that try to approach them or other groups? How do they behave? What is the relationship between different groups? I guess would they socialize with each other?
Yeah, so that's a really great question. So there are 5 social groups or clusters. And it typically is the matrilineal family. So the mothers, their offspring, we've got the grandmothers that are in there. And but typically the males at some point kind of leave and they maybe go on their own for a little bit, kind of go to other social clusters. And about 36% of the breeding that they do is within their social cluster. Whereas the remaining, 2/3 of their breeding, they do with other clusters. So that's where there is concern because the population is so small. We are worried about there being some genetic issues with the population size getting small and them only interbreeding within their small group. But they do breed with the other social clusters within the insular population, but they do not breed with the pelagic individuals, nor do they breed with the Northwestern individuals. And they are not aggressive towards the other individuals. We have seen them in the same area, but they really don't seem to interact a lot. They just sort of overlap in in space and time? That was a great question, though.
Oh, sure. There are some questions here in the chat. I know, Celeste, if you've been following while Krista was responding.
Yeah, I think we had one earlier. I think it was from Kira or Kyra about fishing. And so I know that there are some restrictions in terms of commercial fishing around the main Hawaiian Islands. And I think the question was also about enforcement of fisheries restrictions in the areas, particularly around the main Hawaiian Islands insular population. Krista, can you speak to that a bit?
Okay, so if you happen to find the exact question, but around the, let's see if I can bring up the map from earlier. Well, I'll just try and answer. So around the main Hawaiian Islands, that is open to fishing for commercial and recreational fishing. And then, but commercial longline fishing is actually not allowed around the main Hawaiian Islands. So let me pull up this. Okay, so yeah, where you see the red, that entire area is pretty much off limits to any commercial longline fishing. So the fishermen that are going out and they're collecting the thousands of, or hundreds of tuna that they're then selling to restaurants and to the public and whatnot. But there is fishing that's allowed around the main Hawaiian Islands. And then you asked about enforcement. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I think there was a note about enforcement. I apologize. It's really far back in the chat now, so I can't quite see it, but I believe there was a question about enforcement.
So enforcement with this is, we do have a lot of enforcement out on the water because there are state and federal enforcement officers that are monitoring for any interactions with humpback whales, as well as our spinner dolphins. Now, neither the humpback whale in Hawaii is no longer protected under the Endangered Species Act. That was actually doing well enough that we delisted it back in 2016, but it still has protections under the Marine Mammal Protection Act, and especially because the main Hawaiian Islands is part of the Hawaiian Islands Humpback Whale National Marine Sanctuary. So you can't approach within 100 yards of a humpback whale. And with spinner dolphins, it's not protected under the Endangered Species Act, but it is protected under the Marine Mammal Protection Act. And we actually just came out with a rule 2 months ago that you can't get closer than 50 yards from resting spinner dolphins in 5 different bays throughout the main Hawaiian Islands. And so it's kind of easy to, monitor if there's any interactions with those species, but with false killer whales and with other blackfish species, it's definitely more difficult because they're such cryptic species with, with their dark coloration, and there's, they're not as plentiful as there are with humpback whales. Like we have, more than somewhere like 10 to 14,000 humpback whales that migrate down here every year between like November and May. So the enforcement is more towards other species, but it can help benefit the false killer whale as well. Okay, what other questions do we have?
Thank you, Krista. I just wanted to let you know there was something going on in the chat window. I guess someone impersonating you or something. So Don Boonstra just told me that that person was removed. Thanks, Don, for doing that. Okay, other questions from participants? There's a question there, as I see. What other species of dolphin are they most closely related to, since they don't seem to interbreed?
Who are they most closely related to?
Mm-hmm.
The species? I mean, like they most similarly resemble the other blackfish species that I mentioned, the pilot whales, melon-headed whales, and the pygmy killer whales. But, the population in the pelagic population has about 2,000 individuals. The population in the Northwestern Hawaiian Islands has about 500 individuals. And then the insular population, again, we think it's less than 200. And to have a more precise estimate, it's we're thinking about 167 individuals. And back when we originally did our status review in 2010, the best available science indicated that there were 151 individuals. And so you may think, oh, well, if you had 151 back in 2010, and the most recent abundance estimate is 167, well, then it must be doing better and it's increasing. And like fingers crossed that that's actually happening. But the way that we do our surveys, our line transect surveys, where we take our large research vessels and we go up and down the main Hawaiian Islands and back and forth, we're trying to listen for false killer whales. We put drones out to look for them. We've got people on big eye binoculars and small eye binoculars searching for them. And so we're just doing the best we can to collect the information and try to figure out what the population estimate is. But comparing that all across the years, just because our methods change a bit each year as we sort of refine our methods because of increased and improved technology, it does make it kind of hard to figure out how the population is doing. But we're hoping that it's stable and perhaps improving, but it may take a couple of years before we can be more definitive on that.
Thank you, Kristen. Celeste is now, we'll reach the end time for our presentation. I want to thank you both for your presentation and also the activities that you shared. I think Don Boonstra is returning control of the slides to me here just to close the program. We appreciate our participants. You just wait a minute until we end with the presentation. I want to thank all of the participants and of course our presenters for this evening. The collection we've shared before the link, but we'll share that one more time with you. It's available now on the chat window with the copy of the slides, as well as additional related links from our presenters. The survey is coming up in just a moment, so hang in there so you can provide your feedback to us. And remember to check us out in our coming web seminar next week with engineering, the following week after that with assessment probes. And then we'll take a break and we'll come back in January. We'd like to also thank the entire team at NSTA for their support of web seminars. And with this slide, we'll conclude the program. Don?